Hey guys, Angry GOT fan here. I'm coming to you right now from my kitchen because bacon is happening. And while bacon is happening, I've decided to record my weekly, recording for you. So normally this is the time of the week where I pick a chapter from Song of Ice and Fire books and read it to show how much better it was in the books than it was on the HBO TV series Abomination, Usurpation, Perversion, Fanfiction. However, it doesn't really seem that there's anything in this episode that roughly corresponds with the books in any way. You may say that some of the scenes do. With this last one, Hard Home, none of the people are where they should be, the plots aren't where they should be, the characters are completely wrong. Yeah, can't do it. So, instead of trying to rack my brain to find a scene that would make any kind of sense, I've decided to take a different tack with it. A lot of people have been talking to me lately, and I've been talking a lot lately, about the Accursed King series, new translation that came out recently by French press and into English of the Accursed Kings. So it's by Maurice Druon, and it was written in the 1950s, through the 1950s, and then the final one came out in 1977. And George R. R. Martin actually based a lot of A Song of Ice and Fire off of the themes that are drawn from this historical fiction. And it's great because you read it and it's just history. It's an account of the French kings leading up towards the 100 Years' War. So, think early 1300s. It's really amazing. I enjoyed reading it so much. Books are short. I think I finished the whole series in about 2 weeks. Highly recommend. And if you want any indication, this scene is about a third of the way through the first book, The Iron King. And no, I'm not going to be trying to do a French accent because I can't do a French accent. If you'd like to do a French accent your own, I firmly support that evolution. Philip the Fair was standing at the balustrade, the members of his council motionless about him. The line of their faces was detached from the background, round by the light of the torches. They were like a bas-relief in the rose-colored marble sculpted across the flank of the tower. Even the condemned raised their eyes to the loggia. The king's gaze met that of the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay. They seemed to be taking each other's measure, their glances interlocked. Who could tell what thoughts were theirs, what emotions, what memories surged between these two enemies? Instinctively the crowd felt that something grand, something terrible, and something superhuman had begun. All implicit in this mute confrontation between the powerful prince, surrounded by the servants of his will, and the Grand Master of chivalry, bound to the stake of infamy. Between these two men, whom birth and the accident of history had raised above all other men. Would Philip the Fair, with a gesture of ultimate clemency, reprieve the condemned? Would Jacques de Molay at this final moment humiliate himself and plead for mercy? The king made a sign with his hand, and an emerald shone upon his finger. Alan de Paray repeated the gesture to the executioner, who placed the lighted brand of tow under the faggots and brushwood of the pyre. A huge sigh rose from thousands of breasts, a sigh of relief and horror, excitement and dismay, a sigh made up of anguish and of revulsion and of pleasure. Several women screamed. Children hid their heads in their parents' clothing. A man's voice was heard shouting, "I told you not to come!" Smoke was rising in dense spirals, which a gust of wind blew towards the loggia. Monsignor of Valois began coughing with the maximum of obstination. He took a step backwards toward Nogaret and Marigny, and said, "If this goes on, we shall all be suffocated before your Templars are burned. You might at least have seen that they used dry wood." No one replied to his remark. Nogaret, with taut muscles and fiery eye, was greedily savoring his triumph. The pyre was the crown to 7 years of struggle and of exhausting journeys, the result of thousands of words intended to convince, thousands of pages written to prove. "Go on, flame and burn," he thought. "You've held me at bay long enough, but I was in the right, and you're defeated." Enguerrand in Marigny taking his attitude from the king's, forced himself to remain impassive and to look upon the execution as one of the necessities of power. "It had to be! It had to be!" he kept repeating to himself. But watching men die, he could not help but think of death. The two condemned men before him ceased to be mere political abstractions. That they should have been declared prejudicial to public order in no way prevented their being creatures of flesh and blood, capable of thought, desire, and suffering like anyone else, indeed like himself. "In their place would I have been capable of such courage?" Marigny asked himself, making no effort to restrain his admiration. The words, "in their place," gave him a cold shiver down his spine. He recovered himself. "Where the deuce do these thoughts come from?" he thought. "I am as prone to illness and accidents as anyone else, but nothing more. There is never a moment when my person is not guarded. I am as untouchable as the king." But 7 years earlier, the Grand Master had been in no danger. No one had been more powerful. Hugues de Beauvais, the good chamberlain with the white and black hair, was secretly praying. The wind veered, and the smoke, growing denser and rising higher every second, enveloped the condemned, almost hiding them from the crowd. The two old men could be heard coughing and choking at their stakes. Louis of Navarre, rubbing his red eyes, laughed insanely. His brother Charles, youngest of Philip the Fair's sons, turned his face away. It was obvious that he found the spectacle painful. He was 20 years old. He was slender and had a pink and white complexion. Those who had known his father at the same age said the resemblance was startling, but that Charles had less vitality, and less authority too, a weak copy of a great original. The appearance was there, but the temper was lacking. "I've just seen a light in your house, the tower," said Sir Louis in a low voice. "Must be the guards wanting to have a look too." "They could have my place with my pleasure," murmured Charles. "What? Doesn't it amuse you to see Isabella's godfather roast?" said Louis of Navarre. "Yes, it's a fact that Molay was the godfather of our sister," murmured Charles. "I think that's funny," said Louis of Navarre. "Be quiet, Louis," said the king, annoyed by their whispering. To get rid of the uneasiness that was growing upon him, young Prince Charles compelled himself to think of something pleasant. He began to think of his wife Blanche, of Blanche's wonderful smile, of Blanche's body, of her tender arms soon to be stretched out to him, making him forget this horrible spectacle. How well she knew how to love him and spread happiness about her. If only their 2 children had not died when a few months old. But they would have others, and then life would contain no single shadow. Enchantment and plenitude. Blanche had told him that tonight she was going to keep her cousin Marguerite company. But she would be home by now. Had she covered herself up well? Had she taken a sufficient escort? The roaring of the crowd made him start. Flames were now leaping from the pyre. On an order from Alain de Paré, the archers extinguished their torches in the grass, and the night was now lit by the great brazier alone. The flames reached the preceptor of Normandy first. He made a pathetic movement of withdrawal as the tongues of fire licked at him, and his body opened wide, as if he were trying vainly to breathe. In spite of the rope that bound him, his body bent almost double. His paper mitre fell off, and the great white scar across his purple face became visible. The fire was all about him. Suddenly a pall of grey smoke engulfed him. When it dissipated, Geoffrey de Charnay was in flames. Screaming and gasping and trying to tear himself from the fatal stake, which was shaken to its base. The Grand Master could be seen shouting something to him, but the crowd was growling so loudly in an attempt to drown its own horror that it was impossible to hear what he said except for the word "brother," twice repeated. The assistant executioners were falling over each other in their haste to bring up reserves of wood and poke the fire with long iron prongs. Louis of Navarre, whose mind always worked slowly, asked his brother, "Did you say there was a light in the Tower of Nesle?" For one moment he seemed disquieted. Enguerrand de Marigny had placed a hand before his eyes as if to protect them from the light of the flames. "A fine vision of hell you've given us here, Nogaret," said Monseigneur Valois. "Were you thinking about your future life?" Guillaume de Nogaret did not reply. The pyre had become a furnace, and Geoffrey de Charnay of the Knights Templar was no more than a blackened, sizzling object, swollen and blistered, slowly collapsing into the cinders, becoming cinder itself. Women were fainting. Others were going quickly to the riverbank to vomit into the channel almost beneath the king's nose. The crowd, after so much shouting, had grown calmer, and there was beginning to talk about miracles because the wind ostentatiously continued blowing in the same direction, and the flames had not yet reached the Grand Master Jacques de Molay. How long could he last so long? On his side the pyre seemed intact. Then, suddenly, the pyre carved in, and the flames, reviving, leapt all around him. "That's done for him too!" cried Louis of Navarre. With his long face and neck thrust forward, he was suddenly shaken by one of those incomprehensible gusts of laughter that always seized him at the most tragic moments. Even at this spectacle, Philip the Fair's huge, cold eyes were unblinking. And suddenly the Grand Master's voice sounded off the curtain of fire, as if it addressed to each one present. It affected everyone individually. With great power, his voice sounded as if it were already coming from on high. Jacques de Molay spoke again as he had once done at Notre Dame. "Shame! Shame! You are watching innocents die. Shame upon you! God will be your judge." Flames whipped him, burning his beard, turning the paper hat in 1 second to ashes, setting his white hair alight. The appalling crowd had fallen silent. It might have been a mad prophet who was being burned. The Grand Master's burning face was turned toward the royal loggia, and the terrible voice cried, "Pope Clement, Chevalier Guillerme de Nogaret, King Philip, I summon you to the tribunal of heaven before the year is out, to receive your just punishment. Accursed! Accursed! You shall be accursed to the 13th generation of your line." The flames seemed to enter his mouth and stifle his last cry, and then for what seemed an age he fought against death. At last he bowed double. The cord broke. He fell forward into the furnace, and only his hand remained raised above the flames. It stayed thus till he had turned entirely black. Terrified by the curse, the crowd remained rooted to the spot. Nothing could be heard but sighs, murmurs of foreboding, consternation, and anguish. The weight of the night and its horror seemed to lie over it. The shadows gradually gained ground against the dying light of the pyre. The archers were trying to drive crowds before them, but the people could not make up their minds to leave. "It wasn't us whom he cursed. It was the king, wasn't it?" people were whispering. People looked toward the loggia. The king was still standing by the balustrade. He was gazing at the Grand Master's black hand sticking up out of the red embers. A burnt hand. All that remained of so much power and glory. All that remained of this, the illustrious order of the Knights Templar. But the hand was motionless, raised in a gesture of imprecation. "Well, brother," said Monsignor Valois with a nasty smile, "I suppose you're happy now?" Philip the Fair turned round. "No, brother," he said, "I am not happy. I have committed an error." Valois was already preening himself, ready to enjoy his triumph. "Yes, I have committed an error," Philip repeated. "I ought to have had their tongues burned out before burning them." Guys, check out the series. It's absolutely amazing. As always, I'll see you here. I'll see you on Twitter, on the website. Got 2 more episodes of That Thing left this year. But remember, while a TV show ends, books are forever. No one understands!